The new arrival. The crystalline spires of Centauri Prime Academy pierced the violet sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces refracting the light of three suns. Inside, the grand atrium buzzed with the usual morning chaos, hundreds of students from across the galaxy rushing to their first classes, their various forms creating a living kaleidoscope of scales, tentacles, and shimmer fields. Lyra Winters stood at the entrance, her brown eyes taking in every detail while her fingers absently adjusted the collar of her standard-issue uniform. She appeared exactly as expected of a human student, slightly lost, somewhat intimidated, and completely out of place among the advanced species that made up the Academy's population. The registration drone hovered before her, its optical sensors whirring as it processed her documentation. Species: human. Planet of origin: Earth. Assignment: Advanced Tactical Studies. Warning: Species capability rating below recommended threshold for selected course load. A ripple of snickers spread through the nearby students. A tall figure detached itself from a group of onlookers, moving with the liquid grace characteristic of the selenary species. His iridescent scales caught the light as he approached, head tilted in mock concern. My. It seems the Academy's standards truly have dropped, he said, voice dripping with false sympathy. I am Zix Thor, and I simply must know. Did you perhaps take a wrong turn at Mars? This isn't a primitive tool-use workshop. Lyra's shoulders hunched slightly, making her appear even smaller. I just want to learn, she murmured, eyes downcast. The exchange program. Ah yes, the Cultural Exchange Initiative. Zix Thor interrupted, making air quotes with his elegant fingers. Tell me, what could a species that barely managed spaceflight possibly exchange with the greatest minds in the galaxy? Before Lyra could respond, another voice cut through the growing tension. Perhaps they could teach us about hospitality, Zix Thor, since you seem to be lacking in that department. A willowy figure with dark purple skin and bioluminescent markings stepped forward. A Nexian, one of the more empathetic species in the galaxy. A Nyx, she said, turning to Lyra with a warm smile. Don't mind our resident elitist. Come on, we share first period. As they walked away from the snickering crowd, Lyra kept her movements deliberately uncertain, occasionally stumbling on the perfectly smooth floor. Nyx caught her arm once, steadying her. The artificial gravity can be tricky for newcomers, she said kindly. What Nyx didn't notice was how Lyra's eyes had already mapped every exit, calculated the structural weak points of the atrium, and identified 17 different species just in their brief walk. The seemingly random stumbles were actually giving her precise measurements of the floor's resonance frequency. They entered the Tactical Studies classroom, where Commander Voss, a veteran of the Rigel campaigns, stood waiting. His cybernetically enhanced eyes swept over the students, pausing fractionally longer on Lyra. Something about the way she moved, or rather, the way she was trying to move, caught his attention. Today, he announced, we begin our study of the Arcturus conflict, the greatest tactical disaster in modern history, where a single miscalculation led to the loss of an entire battle fleet. Lyra took her seat in the back row, appearing to shrink into herself as Zix Thor and his friends continued their quiet mockery. But when Commander Voss began displaying the battle formations, her eyes showed a focus that belied her timid demeanor. Her fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, as if muscle memory was trying to recreate movements she was forcing herself to suppress. The commander posed a question to the class. What was the fatal flaw in Admiral Zix's deployment pattern? Zix Thor's hand shot up immediately. The port flank was underdefended, leaving them vulnerable to the enemy's superior numbers. An obvious observation, Commander Voss said, but incorrect. Anyone else? Silence fell. Lyra's hand rose slowly, trembling slightly. The formation itself wasn't flawed, she said softly. The real mistake was assuming the enemy would follow standard engagement protocols. By splitting their forces into smaller, seemingly vulnerable groups, they invited a full assault. But these smaller groups were actually perfect for executing a Therian gambit, if anyone had recognized the possibility. The classroom fell silent. Commander Voss's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Lyra. "Interesting," he said slowly. "The Therian gambit wasn't documented until 3 years after this battle. How did you come to that conclusion?" Lyra's face flushed. I read a lot of history," she stammered, shrinking back into her seat. But Commander Voss had seen something in that moment of confidence, a glimpse of something that didn't quite fit the timid student narrative. As the class continued, he made a mental note to look more closely into Lyra Winter's background. Meanwhile, Lyra continued her careful act, all while gathering intelligence on her classmates, the academy systems, and its defenses. She had a mission to complete, after all, one that required her to remain unnoticed and underestimated, at least for now. As the day drew to a close, she sat in her small dormitory room, writing in her personal log. Day 1 at Centauri Prime Academy. Cover maintained. Beginning assessment of potential candidates for the exchange initiative. The galaxy's best and brightest are here, but are they ready for the truth about humanity? Beneath the surface. 2 weeks into the semester at Centauri Prime Academy, the whispers about the human student had mostly died down. Lyra Winter had settled into a routine of carefully measured mediocrity, performing just well enough to stay in her classes, but never well enough to draw attention. At least, that was how it appeared to most. Commander Voss stood in the observation deck above the combat simulation chamber, watching his students navigate a complex asteroid field scenario. His cybernetic eye focused on Lyra's ship, noting how it moved through space with an almost suspicious level of inefficiency. "Computer, replay Winter's last 3 near collisions," he commanded. The holographic display showed the moments where Lyra's ship had barely avoided asteroids. Voss frowned. Each almost accident had somehow resulted in her ship being perfectly positioned for the next phase of the exercise, despite appearing completely unintentional. Below, Sixth Thor's voice carried across the chamber. "Watch out, human. These simulations aren't designed for primitive reflexes." His own ship executed a flawless series of maneuvers, drawing appreciative murmurs from his usual admirers. Lyra's ship wobbled slightly in response, as if his words had made her nervous. But Voss noticed something odd. The wobble had caused her ship to slip perfectly into the wake of a passing asteroid, using its gravitational field to conserve fuel. "That's no accident," Voss muttered to himself, making another note in Lyra's file. Later that day, in the Academy's quantum mechanics lab, another strange incident occurred. The class was studying particle entanglement when one of the containment fields began to fluctuate. While other students backed away in alarm, Lyra calmly continued her calculations. "Winter." Professor Hillix's crystalline form vibrated with concern. "Step back from that station immediately." Lyra looked up, seemingly startled, and stumbled backward. In that precise moment, the containment field stabilized. Only Nix, working at the next station, noticed that Lyra's stumble had taken her exactly 3 steps back, the mathematically optimal safe distance from a quantum field fluctuation. "How did you know to move exactly that far?" Nix asked later as they walked to the dining hall. "Oh, lucky guess," Lyra offered, ducking her head. "I just moved until I felt safer." Nix's bioluminescent patterns shifted in a way that suggested skepticism, but she didn't press further. As they entered the dining hall, the usual cacophony of various species consuming their culturally specific meals filled the air. Sixth Thor and his group occupied their usual table, their conversation carrying across the room. "Did you hear about the latest human achievement?" he asked, making sure Lyra could hear. They'd finally figured out how to stabilize a quantum tunnel for more than a microsecond. "Next thing you know, they'll be inventing the wheel." His friends laughed, but Lyra noticed that Nex's patterns had shifted to a defensive configuration. "Don't let them get to you," Nix said softly. "It's fine," Lyra replied, selecting something that looked deliberately unfamiliar from the food synthesizer. "Words can't hurt me." The phrase carried a weight she hadn't intended, and she quickly covered it by pretending to struggle with her eating utensils. That evening, Commander Voss sat in his office, reviewing security footage from the quantum mechanics lab. He froze the frame where Lyra had moved back from the containment field. Computer, analyze subject's movement pattern. Analysis complete, the AI responded. Movement exhibits precise mathematical correlation with quantum field decay rates. Probability of random occurrence. 0.3%. Voss leaned back, his cybernetic eye whirring thoughtfully. He pulled up Lyra's application file again, noting the perfectly average test scores, the standard recommendations, the utterly unremarkable background. Too unremarkable. He was about to dig deeper when an alert flashed across his screen. The Academy's primary reactor was showing unusual power fluctuations. As he pulled up the diagnostic screen, he noticed something else, a subtle pattern in the fluctuations that seemed almost intentional. In her dormitory room, Lyra sat cross-legged on her bed, appearing to study quantum mechanics. But her tablet actually displayed encrypted transmissions intercepted from the Academy's communications array. Her eyes moved rapidly across the screen, decoding complex patterns that would have taken most AI systems hours to process. A soft knock at her door caused her to switch screens instantly. "Come in," she called, her voice returning to its carefully maintained timidity. Nix entered, her patterns showing concern. "I brought you some notes from advanced xenobiology," she said. "I noticed you were struggling with the cellular differentiation concepts." "Thank you," Lyra smiled, accepting the notes. "You're always so kind to me." Nix's patterns shifted to a frequency Lyra recognized as hesitation. "Can I ask you something?" When Lyra nodded, she continued. "Today in the lab, and really, every day since you arrived, something doesn't quite add up." Lyra's heart rate increased slightly, but her external appearance remained unchanged. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly," Nix admitted. "It's just, sometimes you seem like two different people. The way you move, the things you know but try to hide." She paused. "Why are you really here, Lyra?" For a moment, something changed in Lyra's eyes, a hardness, a depth that seemed to contain galaxies of hidden knowledge. But it was gone so quickly that Nix thought she might have imagined it. "I'm just trying to learn," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying its usual uncertainty. "Sometimes things look different than they are." After Nix left, Lyra returned to her encrypted communications. A message was waiting. Timeline accelerated. "They're coming sooner than expected. Maintain cover, but prepare for contingency alpha." Lyra's posture changed instantly, all pretense of timidity vanishing as she typed her response. "Understood, Command. Subject assessment nearly complete. Recommend proceeding with Phase 2. She glanced out her window at the three setting suns, their light painting the crystalline spires in shades of purple and gold. Soon, very soon, everyone at Centauri Prime Academy would learn why humans had been chosen for this mission. But for now, she had to maintain her cover, even as events were rapidly spinning toward a revelation none of them were truly prepared for. Rising storm. The morning brought news that sent ripples of excitement through the Academy. Today would mark the beginning of the interstellar combat trials, a series of tests that would determine the top tactical minds among the students. Lyra sat quietly in the briefing hall as Commander Voss explained the parameters. "These trials will push you beyond your limits," he announced, his cybernetic eye scanning the room. "You'll face scenarios drawn from real combat situations, including several that have never been successfully resolved." Zixthor's scales rippled with confidence. Finally, a chance to demonstrate true tactical superiority, he said loudly enough for Lyra to hear. The first trial placed students in individual simulation pods, each facing a unique crisis scenario. Lyra's pod activated, and she found herself at the helm of a damaged scout ship, deep in uncharted space. The mission parameters were simple: survive. She made a show of fumbling with the controls at first, but her eyes darted across the readouts with practiced efficiency. A gravitational anomaly was forming nearby, one that shouldn't exist naturally. As other students in their pods fought against more obvious threats, Lyra alone noticed the pattern emerging in subspace. Analyzing scanned data, she muttered, purposely entering commands with hesitant keystrokes while her mind raced through complex calculations. The gravitational distortion wasn't random. It was a signature she had seen before, in classified files that officially didn't exist. In the control room, Commander Voss watched the participants' progress. Most were handling their scenarios with varying degrees of success, but his attention kept returning to Lyra's screen. Her ship's movement seemed erratic, almost amateurish, yet she hadn't taken a single point of damage. "Computer, overlay efficiency analysis on Winter's flight pattern," he commanded. The results made his artificial eye whir in surprise. Despite appearing random, her course was following an impossibly precise trajectory that maintained optimal distance from both the visible threats and the subspace anomaly that most students hadn't even detected. The scenario suddenly escalated. The anomaly burst open, revealing what Lyra had already suspected: a hidden fleet emerging from artificially generated subspace pockets, a tactic that, officially, hadn't been invented yet. Multiple hostile contacts. The simulation AI announced to all participants. Emergency protocols engage. Chaos erupted across the trial pods as students scrambled to respond to the unexpected threat. Zixthor's ship executed a series of technically perfect, but ultimately predictable evasive maneuvers. Others tried to form defensive formations, following textbook protocols that were useless against this unknown enemy. Lyra's hands hesitated over the controls, her mind racing. Maintaining her cover was important, but lives, even simulated ones, hung in the balance. She had seconds to decide how much to reveal. A message flashed across her pod's secure channel. Assessment phase complete. Limited tactical display authorized. Taking a deep breath, Lyra let just a fraction of her true skill show. Her ship's seemingly clumsy movements suddenly gained purpose. She orchestrated a series of near misses that herded the enemy vessels into specific positions, using their own attack patterns against them. "Winter, what are you doing?" Zixthor's voice crackled over the comm. "Fall back and let those of us with actual training handle this." But Lyra was already implementing a strategy that wouldn't be invented for another 50 years. She used the gravitational anomaly itself as a weapon, manipulating its fields in ways that should have been impossible for any junior academy student to understand. In the control room, Commander Voss's face grew increasingly grave as he watched. "Those maneuvers," he muttered. "They're classified Section 7 sequences. No student should even know they exist." The simulation ended with Lyra's unorthodox strategy saving most of the student fleet, though she made sure to take enough damage to rank in the middle of the performance metrics. As the pods opened, she emerged looking appropriately shaken and surprised by her lucky survival. "Interesting approach, Winter," Commander Voss said as the students filed out. "Those gravitational calculations would challenge our most advanced computers." I just did what felt right," she stammered, but she could see in his cybernetic eye that her cover had begun to crack. Later that evening, as students celebrated their performance in the trials, Nix found Lyra alone in the observatory, staring at a holographic display of the Milky Way. "You're not what you seem, are you?" Nix asked quietly, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with curiosity and concern. Lyra turned, and for a moment, her posture changed. She stood straighter, her eyes holding the weight of secrets that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity. But before she could respond, every alarm in the academy began to scream. "Security breach detected," the AI announced. "Unknown entities have penetrated the outer defense grid. This is not a drill. All students report to secure locations immediately." Lyra's tablet discreetly vibrated with an encrypted message. "They're here. Phase 2 compromised. Contingency Alpha now active." She looked at Nix, who had never seen such intensity in her friend's eyes before. "Get to the shelter," Lyra ordered, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. What's about to happen isn't part of any test. As chaos erupted throughout the academy, Commander Voss received his own alert. The file he'd been trying to access about Lyra Winter had just been declassified, and what he read made his blood run cold. The human exchange student program wasn't about learning from the galaxy's best. It was about finding out if they were ready to face what was coming. And now, ready or not, that threat had arrived. The crystalline spires of Centauri Prime Academy pierced the violet sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 suns. Inside, the grand atrium buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Hundreds of students from across the galaxy rushing to their first classes, their various forms creating a living kaleidoscope of scales, tentacles, and shimmer fields. Lyra Winter stood at the entrance, her brown eyes taking in every detail while her fingers absently adjusted the collar of her standard-issue uniform. She appeared exactly as expected of a human student, slightly lost, somewhat intimidated, and completely out of place among the advanced species that made up the Academy's population. The registration drone hovered before her, its optical sensors whirring as it processed her documentation. Species: human. Planet of origin: Earth. Assignment: advanced tactical studies. Warning: species capability rating below recommended threshold for selected course load. A ripple of snickers spread through the nearby students. A tall figure detached itself from a group of onlookers, moving with the liquid grace characteristic of the selenary species. His iridescent scales caught the light as he approached, head tilted in mock concern. My, it seems the Academy's standards truly have dropped, he said, voice tripping with false sympathy. I am Zix Thor, and I simply must know. Did you perhaps take a wrong turn at Mars? This isn't a primitive tool-use workshop. Lyra's shoulders hunched slightly, making her appear even smaller. I just want to learn, she murmured, eyes downcast. The exchange program. Ah yes, the Cultural Exchange Initiative. Zix Thor interrupted, making air quotes with his elegant fingers. Tell me, what could a species that barely managed spaceflight possibly exchange with the greatest minds in the galaxy? Before Lyra could respond, another voice cut through the growing tension. Perhaps they could teach us about hospitality, Zix Thor, since you seem to be lacking in that department. A willowy figure with dark purple skin and bioluminescent markings stepped forward. A Nexian, one of the more empathetic species in the galaxy. I'm Nyx, she said, turning to Lyra with a warm smile. Don't mind our resident elitist. Come on, we share first period. As they walked away from the snickering crowd, Lyra kept her movements deliberately uncertain, occasionally stumbling on the perfectly smooth floor. Nyx caught her arm once, steadying her. The artificial gravity can be tricky for newcomers, she said kindly. What Nyx didn't notice was how Lyra's eyes had already mapped every exit, calculated the structural weak points of the atrium, and identified 17 different species just in their brief walk. The seemingly random stumbles were actually giving her precise measurements of the floor's resonance frequency. They entered the Tactical Studies classroom, where Commander Voss, a veteran of the Rigel campaigns, stood waiting. His cybernetically enhanced eye swept over the students, pausing fractionally longer on Lyra. Something about the way she moved, or rather, the way she was trying to move, caught his attention. Today, he announced, we begin our study of the Arcturus conflict, the greatest tactical disaster in modern history, where a single miscalculation led to the loss of an entire battle fleet. Lyra took her seat in the back row, appearing to shrink into herself as Zix Thor and his friends continued their quiet mockery. But when Commander Voss began displaying the battle formations, her eyes showed a focus that belied her timid demeanor. Her fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, as if muscle memory was trying to recreate movements she was forcing herself to suppress. The commander posed a question to the class. What was the fatal flaw in Admiral Zix's deployment pattern? Zix Thor's hand shot up immediately. The port flank was underdefended, leaving them vulnerable to the enemy's superior numbers. An obvious observation, Commander Voss said, but incorrect. Anyone else? Silence fell. Lyra's hand rose slowly, trembling slightly. The formation itself wasn't flawed, she said softly. The real mistake was assuming the enemy would follow standard engagement protocols. By splitting their forces into smaller, seemingly vulnerable groups, they invited a full assault. But these smaller groups were actually perfect for executing a Therian gambit, if anyone had recognized the possibility. The classroom fell silent. Commander Voss's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Lyra. Interesting, he said slowly. The Therian gambit wasn't documented until 3 years after this battle. How did you come to that conclusion? Lyra's face flushed. I read a lot of history, she stammered, shrinking back into her seat. But Commander Voss had seen something in that moment of confidence, a glimpse of something that didn't quite fit the timid student narrative. As the class continued, he made a mental note to look more closely into Lyra Winter's background. Meanwhile, Lyra continued her careful act, all while gathering intelligence on her classmates, the Academy systems, and its defenses. She had a mission to complete, after all, one that required her to remain unnoticed and underestimated, at least for now. As the day drew to a close, she sat in her small dormitory room, writing in her personal log, Day 1 at Centauri Prime Academy. Cover maintained. Beginning assessment of potential candidates for the exchange initiative. The galaxy's best and brightest are here, but are they ready for the truth about humanity? Truth unveiled. The Academy's crystalline spires pulsed with red emergency lighting as sirens wailed through every corridor. Students from 100 worlds rushed toward the shelter areas, their various evolutionary adaptations, scales, wings, tentacles, and shimmer fields, all equally useless against the unknown threat that had breached their defenses. Commander Voss stood in the tactical center. His cybernetic eye-processing data streams faster than most AI systems. Multiple breaches in sectors 7 through 13. The defense AI reported. Unknown energy signatures. No match in Galactic database. Sir, a junior officer called out. The quantum defense grid is failing. These entities, they're using principles we've never seen before. Voss glanced at the newly declassified file still open on his screen. Operation Silent Watch. Commander Lyra Winter, Terran Special Operations. Mission: evaluate advanced species readiness for first contact with the void entity. Cover: exchange student. In the main corridor, Zixthor and a group of senior students had taken up defensive positions, their confidence from the morning's trials evaporating as the Academy's supposedly impenetrable shields began to fail. Where's the human? Someone asked. Probably hiding under her bed, Zixthor sneered, but his scales had lost their usual luster. A shadow passed over the Academy's central dome, something massive and dark that seemed to drink in light itself. The temperature dropped dramatically as reality itself began to warp. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, but it wasn't the timid whisper they'd grown used to. Everyone to the quantum physics lab. Now, she commanded, her tone carrying such authority that even Zixthor found himself automatically obeying. As they ran, students saw a different Lyra, one who moved with fluid precision, every step calculated, every gesture efficient. She reached the lab's main console, and her fingers flew across the controls with practiced ease. "What are you doing?" Professor Helix demanded, his crystalline form vibrating with stress. "What I was sent here to do," Lyra replied, not looking up from her work. "Computer, authorize Coalition Emergency Protocol Winter Alpha 7. Authorization code, Terra Prime." The Academy's AI responded instantly. Authorization confirmed. "Welcome, Commander Winter. Coalition protocols engage." The students stared in shock as holographic displays materialized around Lyra, showing tactical data in configurations they'd never seen before. Her entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the shy exchange student, replaced by someone who radiated command presence. "Those things out there," she explained as she worked, are called void entities. Humanity encountered them 30 years ago on the edges of explored space. We've been fighting them ever since, in secret, while we evaluated which species might be ready to join the fight. That's impossible, Thor protested, but his voice lacked its usual arrogance. Humans are barely space-capable. Lyra laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's what we wanted everyone to think. The truth is, humanity advanced faster than any species in recorded history because we had to. The void entities attacked Earth first, and we drove them back. But they're returning, stronger than ever, and this time they're targeting the entire galaxy. She brought up a schematic of the Academy. This facility wasn't chosen randomly. It's built on top of an ancient quantum defense network. The entities are trying to prevent us from activating it. Commander Voss burst into the lab, his cybernetic eye glowing bright. The file. You're not just any commander. No, Lyra agreed, her fingers still dancing across the controls. I'm the one who designed the quantum defense protocols. Humanity has been preparing for this moment for decades. We established the exchange program to identify potential allies, species with the insight and courage to face what's coming. The Academy shook as another entity passed overhead. The darkness outside the windows had become almost absolute. But we're students, someone protested. We're not ready for this. You're the best minds from the most advanced civilizations in known space, Lyra countered. And today's trial wasn't just a test, it was a preview. Those simulated tactics, they were based on actual void entity attack patterns. Understanding dawned on Nyx's face. That's why you held back during the trials. You already knew what we were really fighting. Precisely. Lyra's hands finally stilled over the console. Now I need to know, are you ready to learn what humanity can really do? The quantum defense network hummed to life, its power making the air itself vibrate. Outside, the darkness pressed closer, but now they could see the entities clearly, massive forms that seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Lyra stood straight, all pretense gone, her bearing now that of someone who had commanded fleets and fought battles in spaces between realities. I can activate the network, but I need your help. Each of you sees patterns differently, understands physics in unique ways. Together, we might just have a chance. She looked at her former classmates. Thor with his perfect grasp of spatial dynamics, Nyx's intuitive understanding of energy fields, Professor Hillix's mastery of quantum mechanics, and dozens of other brilliant minds from across the galaxy. So, she asked, her voice carrying the weight of both command and hope, who's ready to find out what we can really achieve when we work together? The Academy trembled as the void entities began their final approach. But in the quantum physics lab, species that had looked down on humanity just hours ago gathered around a human commander, ready to face the greatest threat their galaxy had ever known. New understanding. In the quantum physics lab of Centauri Prime Academy, time seemed to compress as Lyra's fingers danced across the control interface, reconfiguring systems that most of the galaxy didn't know existed. The darkness outside had become absolute, broken only by the occasional ripple of reality as the void entities circled closer. The defense network operates on principles of unified quantum consciousness, Lyra explained, her voice calm and authoritative. Each control node needs to be synchronized with a different pattern of thought. That's why we needed the brightest minds from across the galaxy. Each species perceives reality in a unique way. Commander Voss stepped forward, his cybernetic eye processing the holographic displays. You've been preparing the Academy for this since you arrived. Those clumsy stumbles. We're mapping the resonance frequencies of the building's quantum architecture, Lyra confirmed. Every time I seemed to make a mistake, I was actually calibrating another part of the system. Thor moved closer to one of the control nodes, his scales reflecting the emergency lighting. So all this time, when we thought we were superior, his voice trailed off, humbled for perhaps the first time in his life. Humanity never needed to prove its superiority. Lyra said firmly. We needed allies who could think differently than we do. The void entities operate beyond conventional physics. Defeating them requires perspectives from every corner of the galaxy. She turned to address the gathered students and faculty. Each control node corresponds to a different aspect of reality. Zixthor, your species' understanding of spatial dynamics is unmatched. Take the gravimetric controls. Nyx, your ability to perceive energy patterns makes you perfect for the quantum field harmonics. Professor Helix, we need your crystalline perception for the dimensional stabilizers. One by one, she assigned positions based on each species' unique abilities. The Academy shuddered as another void entity passed overhead, its presence distorting the very fabric of space-time. What we're about to attempt has never been done before, Lyra continued. We're going to create a unified quantum field that draws power from the fundamental differences between our species. The more diverse our perspectives, the stronger the field becomes. As each student took their position, Lyra revealed the truth about humanity's role in the galaxy. Earth wasn't just another developing world. We were the first to encounter the void entities and survive. Our rapid technological advancement wasn't just about reaching the stars. It was about preparing to defend them. The control nodes hummed to life as each operator connected with their station. Nyx's bioluminescent patterns synchronized with the quantum harmonics, creating waves of energy that rippled through subspace. Zixthor's natural understanding of spatial relationships allowed him to map the entity's movements in 11 dimensions simultaneously. They're beginning their final approach, Commander Voss reported, his cybernetic systems interfacing with the Academy's sensors. Whatever we're going to do, it needs to happen now. Lyra nodded, her hands hovering over the master control interface. What you're about to see is why humanity kept its true capabilities hidden. We learned early on that conventional weapons were useless against the void entities. The only effective defense is to rewrite the laws of physics themselves, locally, temporarily, but completely. She looked at each of her former classmates, seeing not the prejudice and dismissal of before, but determination and trust. Everyone, initiate your sequences on my mark. Remember, don't fight each other's patterns. Let them flow together. Let them become something new. The void entities struck, their assault bending reality like paper in a storm. But at that exact moment, Lyra gave the command. Now. The quantum defense network activated, channeling the combined perspectives of 20 different species into a single impossible moment. The laws of physics shifted, reformed, and transcended themselves. The entities, for the first time in their existence, encountered a reality they couldn't bend to their will. Light exploded outward from the Academy in fractal patterns that incorporated aspects of every participating species' perception of reality. The void entities recoiled, their grip on normal space weakening as they encountered a defense that operated on principles even they couldn't comprehend. Containment field is holding, Professor Helix announced, his crystalline form resonating with the dimensional stabilizers. The entities are being forced back into their own space. Lyra's fingers flew across the controls, coordinating the combined effort of every participant. Push harder. Show them what we can do together. The quantum field expanded, driven by the unified will of the galaxy's greatest minds. Where the entities had brought darkness, now came light in colors that had never existed before. Where they had distorted reality, now came order born from the combined understanding of 20 different evolutionary approaches to physics. Finally, with a sound that existed in no known spectrum, the void entities retreated. The darkness lifted, revealing the 3 suns of Centauri Prime once again. As the emergency lights faded and regular power restored itself, the lab fell silent. Everyone stared at each other, then at Lyra, seeing her, seeing humanity, with new eyes. That, she said softly, is why we created the exchange program. Not to learn from you, but to learn if you were ready to learn from us. To see if we could trust you with the knowledge of what's really out there and what it takes to fight it. Zixthor approached her, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine respect. Why tell us now? Why reveal everything? Because the void entities are done testing our defenses, Lyra explained. That attack was just the beginning. They're coming in force, and humanity can't fight them alone anymore. We need a galaxy united not by fear or competition, but by the strength of our differences. She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes, whether they were human, compound, crystalline, or something else entirely. Today, you proved that unity is possible. You proved that when we stop fighting about who's superior and start working together, we can achieve things that no single species could imagine. Commander Voss stepped forward. So what happens now, Commander Winter? Lyra smiled, but it was a smile tempered by the weight of responsibility. Now we begin the real work. The Academy won't just be a school anymore. It'll be the first training center for a unified galactic defense force. Each of you will help develop new techniques that combine your species' unique insights with what humanity has learned about fighting the void. She turned to face the window, where the first sun was rising. The galaxy is changing. The old rivalries, the old prejudices, we can't afford them anymore. Today showed us what we can achieve when we embrace our differences instead of mocking them. Nyx moved to stand beside her, her patterns glowing with determination. We'll need to tell the others. All the species who look down on humanity. They need to know. They will, Lyra assured her. But more importantly, they'll learn the same lesson you did today. True strength doesn't come from being superior. It comes from being willing to learn from those who see the universe differently than you do. As the Academy began to stir back to life around them, Lyra knew that everything had changed. The pretense was over, but a new chapter was beginning, one in which humanity would finally step forward to openly lead the galaxy not through dominance, but through their ability to unite the incredible diversity of life among the stars. The truth about humanity was finally revealed, and with it came the dawn of a new age, one that would test not just their strength or their technology, but their ability to bring together the countless unique perspectives that made the galaxy such an extraordinary place. And as Lyra looked at her former classmates, now her allies in the greatest fight the galaxy had ever known, she knew that they were ready for whatever came next.